think the first time I had to go on a Tiny Terror was probably in a rehearsal studio or in a studio when someone had one, and it was kind of like, what's that? It was kind of like a bit of a, everyone thought it was a bit of a joke thing to look at it, but it plug in and it's, yeah, fair dues. It's the real deal. And I think they sort of paved the way for, there's so many copycat things after it that, you know, everyone was going, we've got to do a Lunchbox amp, that it sort of proved that the best things really are just the simplest things with, you know, less.
Okay, yeah, so this is the A4 piece of paper that the actual Tiny Terror prototype chassis was drawn up on. This is the actual one. And this went off to the factory. I got a chassis made, and then I built the amp by hand when I got the chassis back. So I didn't want it to be any bigger than an A4 piece of paper, you know, lengthwise, you know. So that's how that ended up that way. As you can see, there's no possibility it could be bigger than this, you know, if it's drawn up on this.
I've been fortunate enough to work with the folks at Orange for a while, so like, not exactly when the Tiny Terror came out, but like, you know, not too long after it had been in existence. I'd been working with Orange, and I kind of knew about it, and I'd heard about, actually my buddy Butch Walker, I think he used to, when he would go on tour, he would bring a Tiny Terror with him, like out of the country, just because it was an easy way to travel with an amp without kind of relying on rental gear, which can be kind of iffy.
So we had, I mean, the first amp I ever did really with Orange was the 8015 and the 8030. They were kind of done together, but the 8015 obviously was a combo. So although it's quite small, we did a 10 and a 12 at the time, you know. It's still heavy, it's still plywood, still birch, you know. It still weighs a bit, a little combo like that. You can carry it, it's okay.
It was really cool and innovative to have like a Lunchbox head, you know, 7, 14 watts, whatever different watts with, you know, whatever different tubes to make it that wattage. To have something that you can still gig with, you can still play in your bedroom with, you can still jam with a band with, and it's relatively inexpensive, great tone, and portable. I mean, it's kind of like it's weird that, you know, it hadn't been done sooner, almost.
The idea was that, for me, 15 watts, 2 L84s, cathode bias, cranked, that's perfect kind of scenario for me. I like output tube distortion, you know. So the idea is there's 4 bands on the bill. You phone one of the other bands up. Can I borrow your 4x12? It's only 15 watts, it won't blow it. Yeah, sure. You turn up with your little Tiny Terror in your bag, maybe a tuner, a lead, a guitar in a gig bag, you know. You want to drink that night, so you get the tube, you don't drive. You put your little Tiny Terror on top of this 4x12, turn it up to patent pending, and off it jolly well, you know. The other guy's got a 100 watt amp on too, sounding like a chainsaw, and you get the tone of the night, you know. And that was the concept of it for me, you know, which is why it was sold in a little gig bag, you know, in the first place.
I've used it on 3 of our records. Yeah, 3 of our records, and we have 4, so the bulk of the catalog, if you will. I have never in my life been more pleased or had to search less for the tone that I'm looking for in the studio or otherwise than with the Tiny Terror in particular. Of course, I'm a big fan of mini oranges. The OR15 Epic, the OR50. These are amps, in my opinion, that are the finest ever made, the benchmark, the NASA Apollo program, if you will, of amplifiers. But the Tiny Terror in particular is an amplifier that is immediate, instant tone. And I don't mean tone like in some generic sense. I mean tone in the defining sense, the standard by which all shall be judged sense, in my opinion.
There you go. That's that prototype actually built. A bit of dust on it. Should have brushed the dust off before this. So you can see. There you go. So So that was the first hand-wired prototype. I always used to prototype this way, still doing quite a lot of the time. It's sort of get the concept of the design in my head and then build it point to point. The first 8 Tiny Terrors I built myself over a weekend, and we sent 6 of them out to Frankfurt that year, you know. And they were on British chassis. And it was quite weird because I got quite a bit of resistance. People just didn't understand what I was getting at until they saw one. Then they were going, oh my God, that's so cute. And then I cranked it up. So yeah, you just take this around, you know. It's like carrying a handbag, you know. Probably a bit lighter than most handbags, you know.
When it was first displayed at Frankfurt, it wasn't the production model. It was really to sound out people to see what they felt about the amplifier. And people, when they looked at it, they had to look twice. It was so different from anything else that was on the market. But the reaction was really good. People liked it. And of course, they liked the price. That was really important.
It's definitely very versatile, and it could get the orange tone that is needed at a low volume. Whereas a lot of the older orange heads, you can't really get the orange tone, what I consider the orange tone, unless you turn them up all the way. So the Tiny Terror was probably the first orange that I played that you could get closer to the 70s orange tone without having to, you know, ruin everybody else's day.
I wanted clean at low levels, high volume, you know, with volume turned up, into kind of jangle, just on the verge of breakup. And then I wanted it to do the first 3 AC/DC albums really well. And then I wanted it to be able to do Nevermind the Bollocks at slightly higher cranked levels.
Do you think you got there?
Yeah. That's what it does.
It made sounds that were bigger than people thought it was capable of, and it sounds, you know, stands up against any sort of classic big rock amp, or, you know, and it'll do everything. It'll do clean to quiet and clean to really dirty and everything in between, you know. So they're really versatile, and they sound as big as anything, which was hard to believe when you saw it the first time. You think, how can that little thing stand up to the test? But they do.
So the gain structure on the Tiny Terror, I wanted it really simple to use. So you got like volume, you got gain volume, tone volume, you know, gain, tone volume. That's what you got there, and an input, you know. So the gain, one gang of the gain pot, it's dual gang, there's 2 gangs in that gain pot. One's turning up the first stage. The other gang is matching the impedance at the second stage, so that it hammers the output tubes and the phase inverter kind of evenly all the way up as it tracks. So you can get quite a lot of shades from clean at really lower levels through to, you know, loads of areas of classic sort of 70s crunch, you know. And then obviously if you want to bedroom it, you just crank the gain and turn the tone down a little bit, and that kind of evens out the frequency response, you know. But the tone is on the power amp, it's actually a filter. It's not part of the preamp at all, so there's no tone controls loading the signal down. So you get a perceived 3 stages of gain out of a 2-stage circuit. And that was that's really the unique thing about a Tiny Terror circuit.
The orange Tiny Terror actually makes an appearance on 2 of our albums, the Bakerton Group El Rojo album, which is our instrumental side project. It's basically Clutch under a different name, but playing all instrumentals. And also on the Clutch album, Strange Cousins from the West. So I'm very familiar with orange Tiny Terrors because I play one every day in my basement.
I mean, I knew it would be good in the studio because it's a cranked 15 watts for a tuba 12 or a tuba 10 or a 4x12 is a lot better suited to, you know, it widens the range of microphones you can throw in front of it and close mic it with, you know. If you've got like a cranked 100 watt Marshall, you're at risk of damaging certain condenser mics if you close mic them with it. You know, this is a lot more forgiving. You know, and some mics you'll just overdrive the electronics internally, where there's just too much, even when they're -10 or -20, you know, you could, you know, so this would be, I knew this would be a good amp in the studio.
I personally have used them many times in my studio on everything from guitars, to basses, vocals. I've run vocals through them. I've reamped snares through those in a 110 speaker. They pretty much sound great on everything.
So really what you got here is, this is the dual gang, they're all dual gang pots, they don't all need to be. This does and this does. This is just there for shits and giggles. Done like, you could do this with a single gang pot, the tone, you know. Well, that's a filter on the power amp really. So you got this gang is doing the first gain stage, you know. This gang is actually changing the impedance of the second gain stage so that it hammers, as you turn the gain up, it equally hammers the output stage, you know. So you don't get one output tube fire breathing and one turning off. You get them both hammered all the way up or all the way down pretty much evenly, you know, when you kick in. When you hit a chord, you know, you can see the grids lighting up as you play, you know, on these, because I hit them pretty hard on these, you know, the way it's driven. Pentode distortion, it's a spectacular sound, you know. And then obviously this is on the power amp and this is on the power amp. So the only preamp control is gain really.
Cleans, crunch to high gains, it's got everything that you want in there. The EQ's pretty interactive. I've used it so many times with so many different bands. Everybody's recorded with it. We just do a lot of stuff with the Tiny Terror. It's so versatile.
Transformers, well, this has got British ones in it, you know, because these were prototype transformers, you know. I think we ended up with a little more stack on the, obviously when these originally went to Korea to be made, the first 2,000 or 3,000 were made in Korea to this design. I mean everything, all the turns, the interleaving in the output transformer was the same as this, you know. So I think that we ended up with a little more stack on the Chinese and Korean ones, you know. But the actual turns, the wire gauges, the layers and the interleaving, it's a 5-section. It's like a miniature classic vintage 50-watt output transformer, but a 15-watt output transformer.
I've mostly used the Dark Terror, specifically the Jim Roots is the ones I was using, and I mostly use them as little power amps ultimately, but plugging into them and with whatever your pedal board setup is and all that, those things kick ass, man. Just for I actually love the size of them personally, the way they look. Small is better. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously we, you know, wanted to make some variations on it. I wanted to do a high gain one, which was the Dark Terror, which had 4 stages of gain and the buffet effects loop with the shape control on it, you know. Also did a signature with Jim Root, which was his Rock Verb channel in the Terror, you know, Terror package.
The guys at Orange were like, what if we did a Lunchbox version, which is essentially a rocker verb in a lunchbox? And I was like, if you think you can do it, then go for it. So if it weren't for the Tiny Terror, then I wouldn't have this amp, and I wouldn't be one of the first, well, I guess the first guy to be endorsed by Orange and actually have a signature model amplifier, which is very humbling and very cool and pretty frickin' amazing. You know, it kind of blows my mind still when I think about it.
Also, one that looks like a mini Orange amp from '72. The OR15, you know. Again, that's a 4-stage, voiced slightly differently to the Jim Root on the preamp, you know, but it's the same PCB. It's just populated differently, you know. It's got different voicing, you know.
I think it's interesting, like the emphasis on how important this amp has been for a live setting, I think is even kind of transferred into like digital settings. There is like a Tiny Terror Amplitube amp as far as like, you know, plug-in amps go. And I think like when I'm on the road and I can't be in the studio and I want to demo some guitars, like I'll always have that plug-in going. It's great for lead tones especially, but even for like anything just like kind of, it's very set and forget. You can kind of just pull up that plug-in, get that sound you want, and there's really not a lot of like fuss about it, and it sounds really, really rad. And it's cool. It's cool to have that option there.
Yeah, so what people call the Shiny Terror is, it's really a hand-wired Tiny Terror made in the UK with a stainless steel chassis, you know, and premium parts. And the cab is basically a replica of what I've been using for the last 10 years, which is open back 2x10 cabs with Celestion Gold Nicos in them. Kind of worked closely with Celestion when I was developing that, you know, because there hadn't been a good 10 really, in my opinion, for 40 years or more, you know. Not a UK 10. There's been some good American speakers, but they're kind of a different animal to like what I'd imagine that, you know, basically wanted like a Vox Blue, like a Celestion Blue speaker, but in a 10, you know, for it to do like a 10-inch version of what that Celestion Blue G12, the original Celestion G12 did, the Nico G12, you know, so it was a case of it, you know, getting a 10 that actually has that kind of everything that's good about a really good 10 from years of old, but also the stuff that's good about like an Nico ring magnet, not horseshoe magnet, but ring magnet, UK G12, you know. And I wanted it in a cab that was the same size as our 1x12 cab, but with the two 10s mounted like that, you know, so they'd fit in. So it's a really compact cab, it's open back. I love open back cabs for guitar, you know. They just sing like combos. So we're doing that cab in British Racing Green. To go with the stainless steel's got the British Racing Green print as well. As it's basically a Viking funeral for the Tiny Terror. So this is going to be the last Tiny Terror. There's going to be 110 of these, so they're limited run. They're not going to be cheap. And then that's it. You will not be able to buy the Tiny Terror anymore.
I'm kind of pissed, Orange. Why? Why would you kill off this magnificent beast when you could save it from extinction?
The Tiny Terror, it's not tiny. Tiny Terror is like one of those names you give to the giant dude and you call him tiny. You know what I mean? Or slim when it's a big fat dude. I think that's an appropriate sort of way to at least gauge an insight into what the Tiny Terror is.
But I like amps that have got very little controls, or very few controls, that do a lot. That's what I kind of always like, you know. Because you've got a lot of amps out there that have got 20 controls that do nothing, you know, or next to, yeah, the very, you know, you could just glue them down, you know. You know, they don't, I like very few controls that react a lot.
Like, all of a sudden, it seemed like everybody else was like, oh wow, those things are really sick. We should start doing something like that. All of a sudden, all these amp companies are putting out the same. So I think when the Tiny Terror came out, it like revolutionized the small amp possibility of getting all this power out of something you can just travel with.
There's been a few amps within 5 mil in measurement of its size and dimensions, let's just say that.
I think it started the whole Lunchbox amp craze, you know, like you guys, I feel like you guys did that and then everyone started coming out with Lunchbox amps. And that's gotta be cool. You're like the first cool kid in class.
You know, and it becomes a reference piece. That pretty much most recording studios have got a Tiny Terror kicking around somewhere, you know, that I know of anyway.
I've got a studio in Gothenburg in Sweden, And yeah, the Tiny Terror, like I said, is part of my sound. I always go for it when I use, when I'm recording guitars. It's a perfect sounding amplifier for studio, and I use it pretty much on everything. Well, quite literally, since I have it, it's been on every single record I've made.
Most guitar players have one as well as the other bigger amps they use, even if they're not Orange users. You know, it's kind of, there's a few people warm up, a few big artists I know of that use it for a warm up before shows. Can't mention any names, of course, because they're not our artists, So yeah, I mean, it's kind of taught people that they don't necessarily need like a 100-watt full stack to do a show with. Although some shows are still great with a 100-watt full stack. 2 of them or 3 of them,
I have to say that I'm really sad that the Tiny Terror is being discontinued because, it's kind of become like a benchmark amp really. It's up there with, about 10 other sort of classic amps now where it's a go-to amp for people in the studio and on the road as well because they're so portable and they're just really reliable and dependable and they sound good. So I wonder what Orange have got up their sleeve really to sort of go, but we're going to do this instead. But yeah, I'm pretty gutted that they're discontinuing it. It's like end of an era. It was the first of its kind and a load of copycats, so it'll be quite sad to see that thing go. But it also means they'll be really valuable, so maybe I should go and buy one.
Orange is the one. They're the cutting edge amp company forever, since forever. I mean, as far as I can remember, all the best use Orange, man.
Are you proud? I imagine you're quite proud of it.
Yeah, I guess I'm proud of it, how it turned out,
I'm sorry in a way because, is it really the end of the line? I don't know. One never knows what happens in the future. Fingers crossed.